Hello, and welcome to our channel, Stories with Silas. We hope you enjoy watching.
The Arabic signature on the $3 billion will look flawless to the lawyers and the grieving family, but waitress Layla Hassan's pulse hammered as she recognized what her grandfather had trained her to see: a digital forgery that would steal a dead billionaire's fortune from the children's schools he had promised to build. Speaking up would risk everything, but her silence would cost thousands of futures. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The conference room at Whitmore and Associates fell into a suffocating silence. 23 pairs of eyes fixed on the mahogany table where a single document lay beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Attorney Marcus Whitmore adjusted his reading glasses, cleared his throat, and prepared to read the last will and testament of Khalid al-Rashid, the late tech billionaire whose fortune was estimated at $3.7 billion. No one noticed the young woman in the corner, the one holding a silver coffee pot with trembling hands. No one, except Layla Hassan, whose heart had just stopped beating. She had seen something that made her blood run cold, something that would change everything. Layla Hassan had never imagined she would find herself in this position. At 28 years old, she was simply trying to survive in New York City, working double shifts at the Cedars, an upscale Middle Eastern restaurant in Manhattan that catered to wealthy Arab-American businessmen and diplomats. The pay was decent, the tips sometimes extraordinary, but it was the kind of job where you learned to be invisible, a shadow moving between tables, serving mint tea and baklava while million-dollar deals were discussed in hushed Arabic around you. She had grown up in a modest neighborhood in Brooklyn, the daughter of Lebanese immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities. Her father worked in construction, her mother cleaned houses, and her grandfather, Jidda Rashid, had been a master calligrapher in the old country. Some of Layla's earliest memories were of sitting cross-legged on the floor of his cramped apartment, watching his weathered hands guide a reed pen across cream-colored paper, creating flowing Arabic script that seemed to dance and breathe. He had taught her to see what others missed, the subtle curves and flourishes that distinguished authentic calligraphy from mere writing, the individual personality embedded in every stroke. "Calligraphy is not just writing, Habibti," he would say, his eyes twinkling. "It is the soul made visible. Every person's hand is unique, like their fingerprint. You can copy the words, but you cannot copy the spirit." She had spent countless hours learning to recognize authentic script, understanding the natural variations, the slight imperfections that proved a human hand had created the work. It was an art form, a meditation, a connection to centuries of tradition. When Jidda Rashid passed away 3 years ago, he left her his most precious possession, his collection of calligraphy tools, and a leather-bound journal filled with examples of different styles and regional variations. She kept them in her tiny studio apartment in Queens, occasionally practicing late at night after her shifts, finding solace in the familiar movements. She never imagined this knowledge would matter beyond preserving a piece of her heritage. She certainly never expected it would become the key to unraveling a billion-dollar conspiracy. Working at the Cedars had been a stroke of luck. The restaurant was known throughout New York's Arab-American community as a meeting place for the elite. Khalid al-Rashid had been a regular customer for years, often reserving the private dining room for business meetings. He was a tech innovator who had built his empire on predictive analytics software, a self-made billionaire who had arrived in America with nothing but ambition and a brilliant mind. Unlike many of the wealthy patrons, he had always been kind to the staff, remembering names, asking about families, leaving generous tips. Layla had served him countless times, listening as he spoke passionately about his foundation plans, his dream of building schools in underserved communities, his commitment to giving back. Then, 2 weeks ago, Khalid al-Rashid died suddenly of a heart attack at age 62. The restaurant had been somber, staff members quietly grieving the loss of a man who had treated them with dignity. When Marcus Whitmore's office called requesting catering services for the will reading, the owner of the Cedars had personally selected Layla to serve, knowing her professionalism and discretion. She had arrived at the law offices this morning with coffee, tea and pastries, prepared to blend into the background as families fought over billions. She had no idea she was about to witness a crime that would test everything she believed about truth, courage, and speaking up when the powerful tried to silence you. Marcus Whitmore's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Al-Rashid's family and associates. This is a difficult day for all of us." His eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of those who had gathered. Khalid's younger sister, Nadia, sat rigid in her chair, her designer black dress impeccable, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Beside her sat her husband, David Chen, holding her hand. Across the table sat the foundation board members, 3 distinguished individuals who had worked closely with Khalid on his philanthropic ventures. And then there was Omar al-Rashid, Khalid's nephew, who sat at the far end with an expression that Layla could only describe as barely concealed anticipation. Omar was in his early 30s, handsome in a polished way, always dressed in expensive suits that seemed just slightly too fashionable. He had moved to New York from California 6 months ago, claiming he wanted to be closer to his uncle. Layla had served him several times at the Cedars, always accompanying Khalid to their weekly dinners. Something about him had always made her uncomfortable, the way his eyes lingered on the staff, the dismissive tone he used when ordering, the fake laugh he employed when Khalid shared stories. But Khalid had seemed genuinely pleased to reconnect with his sister's son, often telling the restaurant staff that Omar was brilliant, ambitious, and would do great things one day. Whitmore lifted the document, and Layla moved quietly along the wall, offering to refill coffee cups. This was when she saw it. As she approached the table to pour coffee for the attorney, her angle of vision changed, and the document came into clear view. At the bottom of the second page, she could see the signature section. Khalid al-Rashid's name appeared in both English and Arabic, as was his custom on important documents. The English signature looked convincing, a bold scrawl she had seen him use on credit card receipts at the restaurant. But the Arabic calligraphy signature beneath it made her freeze. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Every person's hand creates unique variations, Habibti. The pressure changes, the angle shifts. The flow has rhythm like breathing. Machines and computers, they make everything too perfect, too uniform." The Arabic script on this document was too perfect. The curves were identical in weight and thickness throughout, the flourishes unnaturally symmetrical. Each letter was precisely spaced, each decorative element exactly replicated. It looked like Arabic calligraphy, but it lacked the organic quality of human creation, the subtle variations that should appear in the stroke width, the natural imperfections where a hand lifts and repositions a pen, the slight differences in pressure that create depth and character. None of it was there. She had seen Khalid's real signature dozens of times on credit card slips. His Arabic signature had a distinctive rightward slant, and the final flourish on the D always extended slightly longer than traditional calligraphy would dictate, a personal quirk. This signature had no such characteristic. It looked like someone had selected an elegant Arabic font on a computer, typed out his name, and printed it onto the document. To someone unfamiliar with authentic calligraphy, it would appear legitimate, perhaps even more impressive than a real signature because of its flawless execution. But to Layla's trained eye, it was as obvious as a misspelled word. Her hand trembled as she poured coffee into Whitmore's cup. She nearly overfilled it, catching herself just in time. Her mind raced. Should she say something? Who would believe a waitress questioning a legal document that had presumably been verified by lawyers and witnesses? But if this signature was forged, what else in this might be false? She glanced at Omar, who was leaning back in his chair with the faintest smile playing at his lips. Khalid had spoken so often about his plans to leave his fortune to education, to building schools, to creating opportunities for children who reminded him of his younger self. Would he really have changed his mind? Whitmore cleared his throat and began to read. I, Khalid al-Rashid, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. Layla retreated to her position by the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. She watched as Nadia leaned forward, her face a mixture of grief and curiosity. The foundation board members sat attentively, pens poised over notepads, and Omar's smile grew just a fraction wider. What came next sent shockwaves through the conference room. Whitmore continued reading, his voice steady, but his expression suggesting even he found the contents surprising. After careful consideration and reflection on my life's work and legacy, I have decided to entrust the entirety of my estate to my nephew, Omar al-Rashid, whom I have come to regard as the son I never had. It is my wish that Omar assume control of Al-Rashid Technologies and all associated holdings, as well as my personal fortune, with the understanding that he will carry forward my vision with wisdom and integrity. The words hung in the air like a grenade waiting to explode. Nadia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Khalid would never, he promised the foundation." Her voice broke, and David tightened his grip on her hand, his own face pale with shock. The foundation board members exchanged bewildered glances. Margaret Chen, the board chairwoman who had worked with Khalid for 15 years, spoke up immediately. "Mr. Whitmore, there must be some mistake. Khalid signed the foundation documents just 3 months ago. He pledged 70% of his estate to build educational facilities in underserved communities. We have the paperwork, the architectural plans, the site selections. He was supposed to announce it publicly next month." Whitmore held up a hand. "I understand your confusion, Miss Chen. However, this will is dated 2 weeks before Mr. al-Rashid's death and supersedes all previous arrangements. The signature has been witnessed by 2 independent parties, and the document has been properly notarized." Omar leaned forward, his expression carefully arranged into something resembling humble surprise. "I'm as shocked as everyone else," he said, his voice dripping with false modesty. "Uncle Khalid never mentioned this to me, but I promise you all, I will honor his legacy and his wishes. This is an enormous responsibility, and I don't take it lightly." Layla felt sick to her stomach. She remembered a conversation from just 6 weeks ago, one of the last times she had served Khalid at the Cedars. He had been dining alone, reviewing documents, and when she brought his usual mint tea, he had looked up with that warm smile of his. "Layla," he had said, "I'm finalizing something very important. Schools, real schools, not just donations to existing institutions, buildings where children can learn technology, art, languages. I grew up with nothing, you know. Education saved my life. Now I get to give that gift to thousands of children. The announcement is next month. I can barely contain my excitement." His eyes had been bright with joy, with purpose. That was the real Khalid al-Rashid, not someone who would abandon his life's dream to hand everything to a nephew he barely knew. Margaret was shaking her head vigorously. "This doesn't make sense." Khalid's entire philosophy was about systemic change through education. He gave speeches about it, wrote articles, structured his entire legacy around this foundation. Are we really expected to believe he changed his mind completely in the final weeks of his life? Whitmore shuffled papers uncomfortably. "The will is very clear, Miss Chen. Mr. al-Rashid included a clause stating that he had reconsidered his previous plans and decided that entrusting his empire to a family member would ensure continuity and protect his vision better than any institutional arrangement. Nadia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I want that document examined. My brother would not do this. Something is wrong." Omar raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Aunt Nadia, I understand you're upset. We're all grieving, but we have to respect Uncle Khalid's final wishes, even if we don't understand them. The lawyers have verified everything, multiple witnesses, proper documentation. I know this is difficult, but fighting it won't bring him back." Layla's hands clenched around the coffee pot handle. She could feel her pulse throbbing in her temples. The forged signature glared at her from across the room, its two perfect curves mocking everyone who couldn't see the truth. She thought of her grandfather, of the hours he'd spent teaching her to see what others missed. She thought of Khalid's kindness, his genuine passion for helping children escape poverty through education. She thought of all the kids who would never get those schools, whose futures had just been stolen by a forged signature and a greedy nephew. Her throat felt tight. Who was she to challenge lawyers and legal documents? She was just a waitress, an immigrant's daughter with no credentials, no authority, no reason to be believed. But she also knew something no one else in this room knew. She could prove this will was a lie. The argument continued to escalate around the conference table. Nadia was demanding a full investigation, her voice rising with each sentence. Margaret Chen was citing specific conversations with Khalid, dates and details of foundation meetings. Omar maintained his mask of wounded innocence, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Whitmore tried to maintain order, his voice growing firmer as he insisted the will was legally binding and properly executed. Through it all, Layla stood frozen against the wall, the weight of her knowledge pressing down on her like a physical force. Her mind raced through scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. If she spoke up and was wrong, she would be humiliated, probably fired, possibly even sued for slander. The restaurant owner would be furious that she had embarrassed his establishment by having staff interfere with client business. Her reputation in the tight-knit Arab-American community would be destroyed. She would be the girl who disrupted a billionaire's will reading with wild accusations, the troublemaker who couldn't stay in her place. Finding work would become nearly impossible. But if she spoke up and was right, what then? Omar clearly had resources to forge documents and deceive lawyers. He wouldn't simply accept being exposed. People with billions of dollars at stake didn't just surrender quietly. He could come after her legally, financially, maybe even physically. She thought of the stories her father told about speaking up at construction sites, about workers who questioned safety violations and suddenly found themselves blacklisted from every job in the city. Power protected power, and money bought silence. Yet staying silent felt like betrayal, felt like... She pictured Khalid's face, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the schools. She remembered serving him dinner while he showed her architectural renderings on his tablet, pointing out playgrounds and computer labs with the enthusiasm of a child. "This one will be in the Bronx," he had said. "This one in Detroit. This one in East Los Angeles. Places that remind me of where I started. Every child deserves a chance, Layla. Every single one." Those children were depending on her now, even though they didn't know she existed. Their futures hung on whether she had the courage to speak. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, not just his words about calligraphy, but something he had said during one of their last conversations before his death. She had been complaining about a customer at the restaurant who had been rude and dismissive, and Jiddo Rashid had listened quietly before responding. "Habibti," he had said, his weathered hand covering hers, "the powerful rely on the silence of those they consider beneath them. They count on your fear, your doubt, your certainty that no one will listen. But truth is truth, regardless of who speaks it. A genuine stroke of the pen does not become false because a master calligrapher identifies it. And a false stroke does not become genuine because a rich man presents it. She had asked him what he meant, and he had smiled sadly. I mean that you must trust what you know to be true, even when others cannot see it, especially when others cannot see it. That is when your knowledge matters most. Back in Lebanon, I once identified a forged property deed that would have left a widow and her children homeless. The man who forged it was wealthy, connected, powerful. Everyone told me to stay quiet, that it wasn't my concern. But I had spent 50 years studying the art of writing. I knew the truth when I saw it, so I spoke, even though my hands shook so badly I could barely hold my pen to demonstrate the difference. "What happened?" Layla had asked. Jiddo Rashid's eyes had grown distant. The widow kept her home. The man went to prison, and I made enemies who made my life difficult for many years. But I could look at myself in the mirror, Habibti. I could sleep at night. These things matter more than comfort or safety. Your conscience is something you must live with every day of your life. Choose carefully what you can bear. The memory crystallized her resolve. She set down the coffee pot with trembling hands, wiped her palms on her server's apron, and took a deep breath. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped forward from her position by the wall. "Excuse me," Layla said, her voice barely above a whisper. No one heard her over the arguing voices. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "Excuse me, please, I need to say something." The room fell silent. Every head turned toward her, expressions ranging from confusion to irritation. Marcus Whitmore frowned, clearly annoyed that the catering staff was interrupting legal proceedings. Omar's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in his composed facade. Nadia looked at her with tear-stained confusion, and Margaret Chen tilted her head with curiosity. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Layla continued, her voice steadier now, though her hands still trembled. "But I believe there may be a problem with that document." Whitmore's frown deepened. "Young lady, this is a private legal proceeding. The catering staff should remain silent unless asked to provide service." His tone was dismissive, the kind of voice people used when they believed you had nothing valuable to contribute. But Layla had come too far to back down now. "I understand, sir, but this is important. The Arabic signature on that will, it's not authentic." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Several people spoke at once. Whitmore sputtered something about proper procedures. Omar let out a forced laugh. "This is absurd," he said, his voice carrying just the right amount of incredulous amusement. "Now the waitress is a handwriting expert?" "This is exactly the kind of disruption that my uncle would have hated. Someone please escort her out." But Nadia stood up, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused. "Wait, let her speak. What do you mean the signature isn't authentic?" Layla's mouth felt dry, but she pressed forward. "My grandfather was a master calligrapher in Lebanon. He taught me traditional Arabic calligraphy from the time I was 6 years old. I've studied authentic script my entire life. That signature," she gestured toward the document, "it's too perfect, too uniform. Real calligraphy has natural variations, places where the hand shifts pressure, where the pen lifts and repositions. That signature has none of those characteristics. It looks like it was created digitally and printed onto the document." Margaret Chen was now standing as well, moving closer to the table. "Can you elaborate? What specifically looks wrong?" Layla felt a surge of gratitude toward the older woman for taking her seriously. The stroke width is completely consistent throughout. In authentic calligraphy, even by an expert, there are subtle variations in how thick or thin the lines appear based on the angle of the pen and the pressure applied. This has none. The decorative flourishes are perfectly symmetrical, which never happens with human hands. And I've seen Mr. Al-Rashid's real signature many times at the restaurant. His Arabic signature had a distinctive rightward slant and the final flourish on the dal. She used the Arabic name for the letter D, always extended longer than traditional form. This signature has none of those personal characteristics. Whitmore was shaking his head. This is highly irregular. The will was witnessed by 2 independent parties and properly notarized. We have standard authentication procedures. But his voice carried less certainty now. Margaret turned to him sharply. Did your authentication procedures include someone who could actually read Arabic calligraphy? Or did you just verify that Arabic letters were present? The question landed like a slap. Whitmore's silence was answer enough. Omar stood now, his composure beginning to crack. This is ridiculous. A waitress with no credentials is disrupting legal proceedings based on some amateur hobby. I demand she be removed immediately. This is harassment of my uncle's estate. But Nadia moved to stand beside Layla, her grief transforming into determination. No, she stays. My brother was meticulous about his signature. He considered it a point of pride, a connection to our heritage. If there's any possibility this document is fraudulent, we need to investigate immediately. Layla felt a wave of relief that someone believed her, but she also saw the dangerous glint in Omar's eyes. He was cornered now, and cornered animals were unpredictable. I can prove it, she said quietly. If you let me examine the signature more closely, I can show you exactly what's wrong. And I have my grandfather's journal in my apartment. It has examples of authentic signatures versus forgeries, techniques for identifying digital reproduction. It's only 20 minutes away by subway. Marcus Whitmore removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. This was clearly not how he had expected this morning to unfold. This is highly unorthodox, he muttered. David Chen, Nadia's husband, spoke up for the first time. Marcus, if there's even a possibility of fraud, don't we have an obligation to investigate? We're talking about billions of dollars and a man's final wishes. Surely we can afford 20 minutes to verify authenticity. The room erupted into controlled chaos. Omar was insisting loudly that this was a waste of time, that they were allowing themselves to be manipulated by someone with no legal standing. Margaret Chen was already on her phone, calling a forensic document examiner she knew at Columbia University. Nadia had moved to stand protectively beside Layla, as if sensing that her brother's memory had found an unlikely defender. Whitmore was frantically consulting with his junior associates, their hushed conversation punctuated by worried glances at the will. I need to retrieve my grandfather's journal, Layla said again, and I should call my manager to explain why I'll be delayed. Omar seized on this immediately. Delayed? She needs to leave. Period. This is absolutely unacceptable. Marcus, I insist you end this circus immediately. My uncle's wishes are clear, and I won't allow them to be questioned by someone who serves coffee for a living. The contempt in his voice was palpable now, the veneer of false modesty completely abandoned. But Nadia wasn't having it. Omar, if you have nothing to hide, why are you so desperate to stop an investigation? Her voice was steel wrapped in silk. Layla, please go get your grandfather's journal. David will have his driver take you. It'll be faster than the subway. Omar's face flushed red. This is insane. You're all letting grief cloud your judgment. Uncle Khalid trusted me. He made his wishes clear. This waitress is obviously trying to create drama, maybe hoping for some kind of reward or settlement. It's transparent manipulation. Margaret looked at him coldly. Funny, Omar. I've known Khalid for 15 years, and I've never once heard him mention you until 6 months ago. But I've heard him talk about his school project for 5 years straight. Every board meeting, every dinner, every conversation. It was his passion, his purpose, his legacy. And you're telling me he just changed his mind in the final 2 weeks of his life and decided to give everything to you instead? The implications hung heavy in the air. Layla felt her phone buzzing in her pocket. She knew it was probably her manager, wondering where she was. The will reading had already gone much longer than expected. But before she could check it, David was already escorting her toward the door. "Omar, sit down," he said firmly. "Nobody's leaving until we get to the bottom of this. Marcus, I assume you'll want to postpone any further reading of the will until the signature can be properly authenticated." Whitmore nodded reluctantly. "Yes. Given the circumstances, I think that's prudent. We'll need to bring in experts, possibly law enforcement, if there are legitimate concerns about document fraud." The word fraud seemed to electrify the room. Omar's face went from red to pale. "Law enforcement. You're going to involve the police based on the amateur observations of a waitress? This is defamation. I'll sue everyone in this room." But his protest sounded hollow now, desperate rather than righteous. Margaret was already making another call, this one to her attorney. The foundation board members were conferring in urgent whispers, and Nadia was watching her nephew with an expression that had transformed from grief to suspicion. Layla left with David, grateful for the support, but terrified of what she had set in motion. In the elevator, David spoke quietly. "Thank you for speaking up. I know that took courage. Khalid talked about you sometimes, you know. He said you reminded him of his mother, the way you carried yourself with dignity despite difficult circumstances. He respected people who worked hard and stayed true to their values." The kindness in his words made Layla's eyes sting with unshed tears. The driver navigated through Manhattan traffic with practiced efficiency, but the 20-minute journey felt like hours. Layla's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. What if she was wrong somehow? What if there was an explanation she hadn't considered? But no, she had seen too many examples of authentic calligraphy, spent too many hours learning to distinguish the real from the fake. That signature was forged. She was certain of it. Her apartment in Queens was modest, a tiny studio she could barely afford, even with her restaurant tips. But it was hers, filled with small treasures from her grandparents and photographs of her family. She went straight to the shelf where she kept Jiddo Rashid's leather journal, pulling it down with reverent hands. The cover was worn smooth from decades of use, the pages filled with his meticulous notes and examples. She had preserved it carefully, never imagining it would become evidence in a billion-dollar legal case. When Layla returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. 2 additional people had arrived during her absence: Dr. Patricia Morrison, a forensic document examiner from Columbia, and Detective James Rivera from the NYPD's Financial Crimes Unit. Omar sat hunched in his chair, his earlier bravado replaced by sullen silence. His attorney, a sharp-eyed woman in a charcoal suit, had materialized from somewhere and sat beside him, whispering urgently. Margaret Chen gestured for Layla to approach the table, where the will lay spread out under a bright examination light. "Show us what you see," Dr. Morrison said, her tone professional but not unkind. She was a woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing jeweler's loops around her neck. Layla opened her grandfather's journal with trembling hands, finding the section she needed. "My grandfather documented the differences between authentic calligraphy and various forms of forgery. Here," she pointed to a page filled with examples, "this shows how authentic Arabic script varies in stroke weight. See how the thickness changes naturally throughout? The calligrapher applies different pressure as they move through the letters, creating organic variation." She placed the journal beside the will, and even to untrained eyes, the difference was stark. The journal's examples showed flowing, breathing letters with subtle imperfections that proved human creation. The will's Arabic signature looked sterile by comparison, each stroke mechanically perfect. Dr. Morrison leaned in with a magnifying glass, studying both documents intently. After several long minutes, she straightened up, her expression grave. "The young woman is correct. This signature shows characteristics consistent with digital reproduction rather than handwritten calligraphy. The ink distribution is too uniform. There's no evidence of pen pressure variation, and under magnification I can see tiny pixelation patterns that suggest this was printed rather than written." The room fell silent except for the sound of Omar's attorney scribbling furious notes. Detective Rivera spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I'm going to need you to remain here while we investigate this matter further. If this signature is indeed forged, we're looking at potential charges of fraud, forgery, and attempted theft by deception. I'd advise you to cooperate fully." Omar's face had gone ashen. His attorney leaned in, whispering urgently, but he shook his head violently. "This is insane. There must be some explanation." Nadia's voice cut through his protests like a knife. "Where did you get this will, Omar? Who prepared it for you?" The accusation in her tone was unmistakable. Omar opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Uncle Khalid gave it to me 2 weeks before he died. He said he wanted to make sure I had it, that he trusted me to carry on his work." But the lie was transparent now, his delivery unconvincing even to himself. Margaret was examining the document more closely now, pointing something out to Whitmore. "Marcus, look at the date. Khalid was in Dubai that entire week for a technology conference. I was with him. We had breakfast every morning discussing foundation business. He never mentioned changing his will, never seemed distracted or conflicted. In fact, he was excited because he'd just secured a major donation commitment from a tech consortium to supplement the foundation funding." Whitmore's face had gone grey. As the attorney whose firm had supposedly authenticated this document, the implications for his reputation and practice were devastating. Dr. Morrison was still examining the will, now using some kind of specialized equipment she'd brought. "There's more," she said. "The paper stock is correct for legal documents, and the notary seal appears genuine at first glance. But the signature itself shows clear signs of being added after the fact. The ink composition is slightly different from the body text. Under UV light." She switched on a small device, and the signature glowed differently than the surrounding text. "You can see it's not the same ink at all. Whoever created this forgery was sophisticated, but not sophisticated enough." Detective Rivera was making calls now, summoning additional officers and forensic specialists. The investigation was expanding by the minute. Omar's attorney was advising him not to say anything further, but Omar seemed to be unraveling. "You don't understand," he burst out suddenly. "Uncle Khalid was wasting his fortune on strangers, on kids who would probably drop out anyway. I'm family. I deserved that money. I worked for it, cultivating a relationship with him, listening to his boring stories, pretending to care about his ridiculous philanthropy. That fortune should go to blood, not to some fantasy about saving the world." The confession hung in the air, stunning in its naked selfishness and stupidity. His attorney closed her eyes in visible despair, knowing her client had just confessed to multiple felonies in front of law enforcement and witnesses. Detective Rivera was already reading Omar his Miranda rights, the familiar words taking on surreal quality in the elegant conference room. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Omar seemed to finally realize what he had done, his face crumbling as 2 uniformed officers who had arrived moments earlier moved to escort him from the room. "Wait," Nadia said, her voice thick with emotion, but steady with purpose. "Before you take him, I need to know. Omar, What did you do with my brother's real will? Where is it?" Omar stared at her, defiance and fear warring in his expression. For a moment it seemed he might stay silent, but then something broke inside him. Perhaps it was the weight of everything collapsing, or perhaps some small part of him wanted to unburden the truth. "His home safe," he muttered, behind the painting of the Dubai skyline in his study. "I found the real will there 2 weeks ago when I was visiting. He kept copies of everything. I couldn't destroy them all. There were too many backups, lawyers, foundation people, so I created this new one instead. I thought if I could get it authenticated quickly, get control before anyone could challenge it." Detective Rivera nodded to one of the officers. "Get a warrant for the Al Rashid residence immediately. We need to secure that safe and its contents." He turned back to Omar. "Were you alone when your uncle died?" "The initial report said he collapsed at home, and you were the one who found him." The implication was clear, and the room went ice cold. Nadia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, Omar, tell me you didn't. He was healthy. The heart attack came out of nowhere." "I didn't touch him," Omar shouted, genuine panic in his voice now. "I swear I had nothing to do with his death. He really did just collapse. I found him and called 911, just like I told everyone. I only forged the will afterwards when I realized this was my chance." Detective Rivera studied him carefully. "We'll be investigating that thoroughly, Mr. Al-Rashid. For now, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted grand larceny." As they led him away in handcuffs, Omar looked back at Layla one last time, his expression twisted with rage and disbelief that a mere waitress had destroyed his billion-dollar scheme. The conference room felt different once he was gone, as if a toxic presence had been extracted. Nadia sank into her chair, tears streaming down her face, relief and grief mixing together. "My brother," she whispered, "his dream, the schools. Thank God, thank God." Margaret moved to comfort her, but her eyes kept returning to Layla with an expression of profound respect. David was on the phone coordinating the search of Khalid's home, his voice crisp and efficient despite the emotional turmoil. Marcus Whitmore looked shaken, already contemplating the professional consequences of nearly authenticating a forged will. "Ms. Hassan," he said quietly, "I owe you an enormous apology. If you hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't had the expertise and courage to challenge this document, we would have proceeded with a fraudulent will. The legal and moral implications—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I will be recommending a full review of our authentication procedures. This should never have gotten this far." Dr. Morrison was carefully photographing the forged signature and documenting everything for her report. "For what it's worth," she said to Layla, "your grandfather taught you well." "I've examined thousands of documents in my career, and I might not have caught this without knowing to look specifically at the calligraphy. Most forensic examiners in the United States aren't trained in Arabic script. Your specialized knowledge was the key to unlocking this entire fraud." Within 2 hours, Detective Rivera called from Khalid's penthouse. They had opened the safe and found multiple copies of his authentic will, all dated 6 months earlier, all properly witnessed and notarized. The terms were exactly as Khalid had described to his friends and colleagues. 70% of his estate to the Al-Rashid Foundation for Educational Excellence, 20% divided among family members, including Nadia and several cousins, and 10% to establish scholarship funds at universities. There were also personal bequests to loyal employees, including the staff at the Cedars. Khalid had left each of them generous gifts, with a special note mentioning Layla by name for her kindness and dignity. Nadia wept openly when Whitmore read the authentic will aloud, her brother's true voice finally restored. The story exploded across news outlets within 24 hours. "Waitress exposes billion-dollar will forgery," read the New York Times headline. CNN featured Dr. Morrison explaining the technical aspects of the fraud, while highlighting Layla's grandfather's journal and the importance of cultural knowledge in forensic investigation. The viral nature of the story wasn't just about the money or the dramatic courtroom-style confrontation. It resonated because it represented something deeper. An ordinary person with specialized knowledge speaking truth to power and being proven right. Layla's phone hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke. News producers wanted interviews, lawyers wanted statements, and strangers wanted to thank her for doing the right thing. The owner of the Cedars called her personally, not to fire her as she had feared, but to tell her that she was welcome back any time and that the restaurant was proud to have her on staff. "You brought honor to our establishment," he said warmly. "Mr. Al-Rashid would have been proud of you." The words made her cry, releasing tension she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But the most meaningful call came from Margaret Chen. "Layla, the foundation board met this morning. We're moving forward with Khalid's vision, and we'd like you to be part of it." Layla had been sitting in her tiny apartment, still processing everything that had happened. "Part of it? How?" she asked cautiously. Margaret's voice was warm with emotion. "Khalid left instructions about the foundation's staffing. He wanted people who understood the communities we'll be serving, people who came from similar backgrounds. He specifically mentioned wanting staff who knew what it meant to work hard, to struggle, to appreciate the power of education, to transform lives," Margaret continued. "We're offering you a position as community liaison for our New York operations. You'd work directly with the neighborhoods where we'll be building schools, helping us understand local needs, and ensuring we're truly serving the community. The salary is $65,000 a year, plus benefits. It's not wealthy by billionaire standards, but it's a living wage in New York, and it's meaningful work." Layla felt her breath catch. $65,000 was more money than she'd ever imagined making. More importantly, it was a chance to be part of something that mattered, to help bring Khalid's dream to life. "I accept," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I would be honored." Margaret laughed with delight. "I was hoping you'd say that." "Khalid also left you a personal bequest in his will. $50,000, with a note saying it was for the dancer who never stopped believing in dignity and grace. He saw you, Layla. He recognized your character, and he wanted to help you the way education once helped him." The tears came then, unstoppable and cleansing. She thought of Khalid's kind face, his generous spirit, his unwavering belief that every person deserved respect and opportunity. Over the following weeks, the legal proceedings against Omar moved forward with grim efficiency. The evidence was overwhelming: the forged document, his confession recorded by multiple witnesses, the discovery of digital files on his laptop showing exactly how he'd created the fake signature using Arabic font software. His attorney negotiated a plea deal to avoid trial. Omar received a 10-year prison sentence for fraud and forgery, along with orders to repay all legal fees his scheme had cost. His reputation was destroyed, his name forever associated with greed and betrayal. Meanwhile, the Al-Rashid Foundation for Educational Excellence moved forward with remarkable speed. Margaret Chen proved to be a brilliant administrator, turning Khalid's vision into concrete reality. Architectural plans were finalized for the first 3 schools. Ground would break in the Bronx by summer, with Detroit and East Los Angeles following within the year. Each facility would feature state-of-the-art technology labs, art studios, athletic facilities, and most importantly, teachers who believed every child could succeed. Layla attended the groundbreaking ceremony in the South Bronx on a bright spring morning. Hundreds of people gathered to celebrate: community leaders, foundation board members, local families whose children would attend the school. Nadia gave a moving speech about her brother's legacy. her voice strong despite the lingering grief. Then Margaret called Layla to the microphone. She hadn't expected to speak, hadn't prepared anything. But as she looked out at the crowd, at the children's excited faces and their parents' hopeful expressions, she knew exactly what to say. "My name is Layla Hassan, and I was just a waitress who served Mr. Al-Rashid coffee and tea at a restaurant in Manhattan. But my grandfather taught me that every person has knowledge that matters, skills that can make a difference, and a voice that deserves to be heard." Her words carried across the crowd, clear and strong. "When I saw something wrong, something that would have stolen this dream from all of you, I was terrified to speak up. I thought no one would listen to me. I thought I was too small, too unimportant, too powerless to matter. But I was wrong. Truth doesn't care about your job title or your bank account. Truth is truth, whether spoken by a billionaire or a waitress, by a lawyer or a single mother struggling to pay rent. Mr. Al-Rashid believed every child deserves a chance to learn, to grow, to become everything they're capable of being. That belief didn't die with him. It lives here, in this ground we're about to break, in these schools we're about to build, in every child who will walk through these doors." The applause was thunderous. Parents reached out to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her their children's names and dreams. A young mother with a daughter about 7 years old approached her afterwards. "My Amira," she said, her English heavily accented. "She wants to be engineer. This school, it will teach her computers, yes? Give her chance." Layla knelt down to meet the little girl's eyes, seeing herself at that age, seeing every child who deserved better than circumstances had given them. "Yes," she said firmly, "she'll have every chance to succeed." That's exactly what Mr. Al-Rashid wanted. 6 months later, Layla stood in her new office at the Foundation headquarters, walls covered with architectural plans and photographs of smiling children. The personal bequest from Khalid had allowed her to move to a better apartment, to pay off her student loans, to finally have financial breathing room. But more than the money, she had purpose. Every day she worked with community members, listened to their needs, helped shape programs that would serve them effectively. She collaborated with educators, advocated for resources, and ensured that Khalid's vision stayed true to his values. She kept her grandfather's calligraphy journal on her desk, a reminder of the knowledge that had changed everything. Sometimes she would open it and trace the elegant Arabic script with her fingers, hearing Jiddo Rashid's voice in her memory. "Trust what you know to be true, Habibti, even when others cannot see it." She had trusted her knowledge, and in doing so had saved a dream that would impact thousands of lives. The first Al-Rashid school opened its doors 18 months after that conference room confrontation. 300 students walked through the entrance that first day, their faces bright with possibility. Layla attended the opening ceremony, watching as teachers welcomed children who might never have had access to such excellent facilities, such dedicated instruction, such unwavering belief in their potential. This was what $3.7 billion should do: create opportunity, build futures, transform communities. As she stood there watching children explore their new school, Layla thought about the moment she had stepped forward in that conference room, heart pounding, hands trembling, voice barely steady. She had been terrified of the consequences, certain she would be dismissed, humiliated, or worse. But she had spoken anyway, because staying silent would have been a betrayal of everything she believed in, everything her grandfather had taught her, everything Khalid al-Rashid had worked for. And so ends the remarkable story of how a waitress's knowledge of Arabic calligraphy exposed a billion-dollar fraud and saved a philanthropic dream. Layla Hassan's courage reminds us that expertise comes in unexpected forms, that speaking truth to power can make a real difference, and that sometimes the most important voice in the room belongs to the person everyone assumes doesn't matter. One forged signature, one observant woman, and one moment of bravery changed thousands of lives forever. Thank you for watching. If this story inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more dramatic, uplifting tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Let us know in the comments, would you have had the courage to speak up like Layla? And remember, your knowledge matters, your voice matters, and sometimes the smallest observation can uncover the biggest truth.